And now, people of Gotham City, the moment you have all been waiting for.
On October 26, 1924, Ernest Ogert died convulsing in a straitjacket, his blood said to be boiling from an unknown gas. The Union County medical examiner who saw Ogert's blue-black body was horrified. Ogert's co-workers said he was acting unusual until he finally shrieked that he was being attacked. 3 of them are coming at me at once, he screamed. He was taken home and finally to the hospital. The 3 kept coming at him, and he cried and screamed until his raving lost all meaning as he died in convulsions. He was the first of 5 workers who would die in quick succession in fits of violent insanity from Standard Oil's Bayway chemical plant in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Workers called the chemical loony gas and the factory the House of Butterflies, after psychotic workers who frantically brushed phantom insects off their arms. Some reported feeling insects wriggle over their skin. One said he saw wallpaper converted into swarms of moving flies.
You can call me Joker.
Joseph G. Leslie was declared dead, but that was just what everyone was meant to believe. Only his wife Gertrude knew the truth, and later his son Joseph Jr. On May 4th, 1925, he and an unknown number of badly injured victims from the Bayway plant were quietly transferred to Greystone Psychiatric Hospital in New Jersey. Leslie spends the next 40 years isolated in psychiatric hospitals until his death in 1964. As many as 34 other workers experienced tremors, hallucinations, severe palsies, and other serious neurological symptoms of organic lead poisoning.
You know, I just do things.
The men at Bayway were working with the toxic chemical tetraethyl lead, known as TEL. In the 1920s, a little company known as General Motors began using TEL as an additive in gasoline to improve an engine knock.
Pardon me, mister, but what's the idea of the tiger?
The what, sir?
The tiger leaning on the pump.
Oh, well, you see, our new power formula Enco Extra Gasoline puts a tiger in your tank.
Well, then put a tiger in my tank.
Certainly, sir.
Well, I'll be darned.
Lead was just one of the toxic substances that would be released into the atmosphere continuously in the many years before the 1970s, but lead is a unique case.
Well, that was fun. Who's for Chinese?
In heavy doses, it can cause insanity, aggression, paranoia, hallucinations, terror, and death. Victims will be perfectly normal, then burst into insane fury. Lead is a neurotoxin that damages the brain. It accumulates in the body, in bones, and fatty tissue. Even minute doses can be lethal over time. It can turn skin pale.
Think. How did they beat you, huh? How did they figure you out?
Do you remember the movie Slumdog Millionaire? A game show contestant surprises everyone by answering all the questions correctly and gets accused of cheating until he shows how he learned the answers by recounting his life to authorities. Well, this is nothing like that, really, but I can't say exactly how or when the idea came to me. I know I made the connection between loony gas and the Joker gas pretty early. Then I remember slowly realizing there were all these other connections. I didn't see it all at once, but I had already been researching lead for another project, and after a while I just ran with it. And that brings me to Gotham, which, as you might know, is based on New York City. And New York City, like many of the towering U.S. cities that came out of the 20th century, is riddled with lead.
And now...
Miles of lead pipes still bring water to millions. Lead paint was used all over, inside and out, including schools, until it was banned in 1978.
comes the part.
And by 1935, TEL was added to 90% of fuel, which would mean that lead was polluting the air from almost every exhaust in the country.
Where I relieve you, the little people.
It was used in electronics, mechanics, canned food, tableware, utensils, batteries, weights, bullets, and kids ate it like candy off of peeling walls.
Of the burden of your failed and useless lives.
Over time, the paint became dust on the ground or the floor. Add to that the accumulation of lead from engine exhaust, and the contamination quickly became an insidious plague that went largely uncontested and continues today, even after efforts towards reform and remediation.
And I will live on in the shadows, within Gotham's discontent.
We can't just assume Bill Finger would have known about these emerging problems, but it's possible he would have at least learned enough in passing that it would have been in his subconscious. Neither can we assume he knew the related material just because it was available at the time, although he clearly knew of Paul Linney's work from the previous decade and took inspiration from it. Isn't it possible that the shocking headlines coming out of the Bayway factory could have inspired both the Joker and scare toxins? And so perhaps it shouldn't surprise us when the Scarecrow poisons the water supply, or the Joker gasses the city, the high crime rates in Gotham, the short tempers, the deep-seated paranoia, the unknown, the fear, and the madness. We are symbols that embody humanity as its masters have made it.
You killed Captain Clown. You killed Captain Clown!
So who is the Joker? Well, I can think of at least 3 men, even more if you have the time. But for the sake of simplicity, let's look at the top 3 candidates and see if you have a preference. You could call them the Chemical Syndicate, and if you don't already know, I'll tell you why in a minute. The 3 Jokers are Alfred P. Sloan, who succeeded Pierre DuPont as president of General Motors in 1923.
Frankly, old chum, there's nothing you can do to stop me.
Robert Kehoe, the doctor in charge of worker safety.
Hi.
And as a third, possibly one of the psychotic workers who made it out of the House of Butterflies alive, but changed forever.
Boy, did you get a wrong number. Leave your message at the sound of the shriek.
I'll get to Kehoe, but first, the most compelling case, Alfred Sloan. When Batman debuted in 1939 in Detective Comics Volume 1, Issue 27, written by Bill Finger, he was caught up in a murder mystery called The Case of the Chemical Syndicate. The antagonist was ultimately discovered to be Alfred Stryker, a part owner of a chemical company which he was plotting to take over. Stryker's henchman locks the last remaining partner in a gas chamber to kill him. The Batman crashes through the skylight and rescues him. Stryker attacks the Batman, and the Batman punches him. Alfred falls back against a railing, which breaks, and he falls into a tank of acid below. The Batman remarks that this is a fitting end for his kind. But as always in comics, we can't just assume death. And sure enough, it was insinuated in the most recent version of The Case of the Chemical Syndicate in Detective Comics Volume 2, Issue 27, that Alfred Stryker, now known only as Albie, is quite possibly the Joker. There's a few connections that can be made between Alfred Stryker and Alfred Sloan. The name is an obvious one. His face is arguably another.
We are unfortunately limited to a very narrow horizon of observation.
Is Sloan's involvement at GM as it orchestrated TEL's takeover of the engine fuel market and the loony gas factories that resulted another connection that we could make?
The interests of all are mutual.
I'll leave that up to you.
I like it!
Robert Kehoe might be a less obvious candidate, but he was identified as one of the central men responsible for the TEL takeover. He's also the namesake for the Kehoe Paradigm, or Kehoe Rule, which assumes that in the absence of clear evidence of risk, there is no risk of significance.
I'm more than a man. I'm an idea.
He pioneered corporate disinformation campaigns, the seeding of doubt through the authority of experts and convincing propaganda. After a long and lucrative career defending the lead industry, he died in the 90s after suffering brain damage that left his mind and memories scattered.
And what I found was that this was a liquid compound of lead which was absorbed through the skin and was distributed to the fatty tissues of the body. The fatty tissues of the body being primarily the liver and the brain. And this was the thing that had resulted in my cerebral hemorrhage.
There are other connections to the real world that can be made. The history of lead has many parallels, if you're willing to see them. The Scarecrow is cast as Thomas Midgley, the chemist behind TEL at GM and DuPont. The actual DuPonts, as well as Standard Oil's Frank Howard, would be members of the Court of Owls. Arkham Hospital is Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital, where TEL workers were quietly transferred in 1925. Yandell Henderson and Alice Hamilton are Thomas and Martha Wayne, both loud public opponents of leaded gasoline and lead in general. They attempted to warn officials and the public, but were ignored. Alfred is Charles Norris, who embarked on a campaign to show how New York City was being contaminated, but was also ignored.
Oh dear.
And Batman is Claire Patterson.
I don't believe it. Who are you? Who are you?
The man who was finally the catalyst for change in the 1970s, long after lead contamination was a national health crisis.
Batman? I'm tired of hearing about him. Why can't he just let things go, the way the rest of us do? We count too.
Now, Bill Finger could not have possibly made these connections in 1940. Claire Patterson was only 18 at the time, and it would be another 25 years before he began his campaign against lead. Carl Jung called these sorts of striking coincidences synchronicity, which is considered a pseudoscience as it isn't testable or falsifiable. Jung believed events could be connected on meaning alone, without a cause-effect relationship. Synchronicities are meaningful coincidences, typically explained as bogus correlations, which come down to statistics or the law of truly large numbers, mixed with confirmation bias. For instance, turning pale is associated with being sick. Lead paint is white, clowns wear white paint. And I know I've taken a ridiculous turn, but if it seems like I'm going out of my way to talk about the dangers and history of lead, it's because that is what I am doing.
I'm a man of my word.
But if this sounds ridiculous, the pro-lead propaganda was pure madness. In 1953, the made-up National Cleanup Paint-Up Fix-Up Bureau partnered with the Federal Civil Defense Administration to produce a short film which heavily advertised a newly painted house in the middle. It was targeted towards suburban Americans and showed the house in the middle between two unkept homes which caught fire after a nuclear explosion blew up a fictional city nearby. The film was actually produced by the National Paint, Varnish, and Lacquer Association, who also happened to be promoting white lead paint.
Yes, the White House in the middle survived an atomic heat flash.
I know that sounds confusing to the layman, so let me explain. You see, it all comes down to this Batman fellow, committing the crimes using his so-called villains as narcissistic proxies. In other words, the real villain here is Batman.
Lead is no paper tiger. It is literally elemental and fundamental to our environment and the cosmos. So, am I saying the Joker is lead? Well, no, that's too simplistic. The Joker is an idea, and perhaps he's best manifested in the urban environments of the leaded gasoline era in America, where he was born. Poison fumes in the air, poison in the water, toxic lead paint on the walls, overflowing psychiatric hospitals, rising crime, paranoia, aggression, learning disabilities, totalitarianism creeping at the borders and behind closed doors. Was Bill Finger consciously aware of these parallels, or is this all just coincidence? Surely we can attribute at least some aspects to the subconscious fears in the minds of men at the time Joker appeared. Sadly, we'll never know, and the mystery will continue, or as Robert Kehoe would say,
I've forgotten so many things, and I'm all mixed up in the time element, in the things that I've done within my lifetime.
Paul Linney died suddenly in 1929 of blood poisoning. No, not from lead. It was a tooth infection, but that would be crazy. He died soon after the release of his final film intended as a follow-up to the success of The Cat and the Canary. It was called The Last Warning, based on Thomas F. Fallon's 1922 Broadway play of the same name. An unsolved murder occurs during a live Broadway performance. The victim's body goes missing. The death remains unsolved and the theater is condemned. Fallon's play was adapted from 1916's The House of Fear by Wadsworth Camp. Passages from The House of Fear describe a pallid light growing with extreme rapidity, gathering shape to attack him. And later, outside the House of Fear, a chilling foreshadowing of almost impossible odds on page 156. What's there to be afraid of out here, except trolley cars and automobiles and confidence men and thugs? That's nothing much to be afraid of, is it? When we act in the world, we can feel caged at times. Whether that means we're cogs in a machine, or restrained by the law, or subjects in an oppressive hierarchy, we might retreat into ourselves. Perhaps we find a way to fight for justice, or to protect our innocence, or to give people hope in whatever way is available to us. Sometimes our narcissism gets us into trouble, and it's usually our narcissism that gets us caught, but not so with the Joker. He is always there for you. The Joker is the other side of innocence and the absence of justice. He happens when the meek mind snaps and the pure heart breaks. What happens when you refuse to accept the programming? When every action is to get to the outside, to be on the outer limits, to take advantage of others' insecurities or disadvantages or emotions, to subvert, to antagonize, to confuse, to joke about, to finally get to the truth. I hear the universe laughing, so I call it a joke. Then I'm reminded of the seriousness of it all, and my smile fades. That's when I hear the laughing again. It's not wrong to say we have yet to come to grips with this period in our history, and the Joker played a role in that as well. The homicidal maniac was quickly replaced with a goofy and comically elaborate prankster, and it turns out Batman was no help either. But by the time of Bill Finger's death in 1974, leaded gasoline would have peaked in the U.S., and reforms would continue to reduce lead use and blood levels in our homes and community. Still, the Joker is real, and he's still out there.
What are you laughing at?
There's lots of other videos to watch, so join me, subscribe, like the videos you like, share the videos you love, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, thank you. You are the fuel to the fire.